Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, sorry. We will be getting started very shortly.
Yes, good afternoon, good morning, or even good evening, wherever you are.
Just going to give it another moment to let everyone get joined on with us today, and then we'll be getting started. Okay, amazing. A warm welcome to everyone that is joining us today. It's going to be presented by Chris from Awareness. Awareness is a leadership development company that builds human-centric skills. They deliver evidence-based training that build habits and skills at scale to increase resilience, collaboration, and leadership at the individual, team, and organization level. Awareness works in 15 countries and has a growing presence in the UK, working with a wide range of clients such as the UK Parliament, HSBC, and the Formula One team. Chris will be joined by a guest speaker today, Amari, who works in people operations and staff welfare at One Acre Fund, a large social enterprise working across East Africa. Today, the session will be recorded, so you will have everything to refer back to throughout the webinar today. We are going to save some time at the end for a Q&A also, so if you have any questions for Chris and Amari, please do use the Q&A and chat box, and we will try work through those for you. At the end of the webinar, you will receive a short survey. It will just pop up on your screens. Any feedback on there is grateful, so please do fill that in if you are able. But with that all said, I will pass you over to Chris and Amari.
So thanks very much, Katie. So welcome, everyone. Really nice that you're here. This is a topic I think that is always useful. It's one of those topics that, kind of we've talked about, I guess, often enough. Nonetheless, it's still very important to talk about it. And I'm really, really delighted, Amari, that you're here with us for this. I think that you will have a lot to teach us in some sense. I mean, I think when people get into your story and to understand, what your background is, what you're doing, we'll have a nice chance. And so I thought what I'll do is I'll just, start by actually giving you a chance to introduce yourself. And I almost find it the most elegant, for you to do this yourself rather than to me to say, great things. So maybe if you just wanted to just say a little bit about yourself and your background, and especially, I think also it's interesting to hear a lot about the One Acre Fund, what you're doing. It's very important work.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Chris. And good morning or afternoon, everybody. So my name is Amari Alexander. And as the slide says, I've been just celebrated 10 years of working across Eastern and Southern Africa. And I'm lucky enough to, at this point in these 10 years, call Zomba, Malawi, my home. And that's where I have worked for One Acre Fund for the last 6 years as well. And I've done a number of things with One Acre Fund. But it's a big organization. We have about 7,000 staff across 10 country programs. And our goal is to serve farmers and to serve farmers first. And so that looks different in a variety of the contexts that we're working in, but that is our number one kind of driving impact that we're looking to make. And so in this current role that I'm in, I manage global health, safety, and security, as well as oversee some gender transformative work that we're doing both in terms of our programs with our farmers, but also with staff. And so I have a small permaculture farm that I am building and working on with my partner. And I love kind of the simple rural living that Zomba Malawi provides me. And that's given me a really excellent background and setting for the work I've done on stress management, working with my own mental health and my own healing. I'm one of many people who have a chronic illness and who is working daily to manage that. And the ways that I manage stress is also the way that I keep myself healthy and in recovery. So this is an incredibly personal journey for me, and I'm really excited that I get to talk to you a little bit about the work that I do, but as well as the work I've done for myself. So thank you, Chris.
And I mean, when we first met, so you told me a few stories, and I realized, okay, I think that puts all of the stress that I'm facing in perspective. And I think that's part of our journey today is,
Yeah.
that's why I think it's really nice to have you here, that, we all get caught up in our stress, and I think that some of the experiences you have, Africa in your role, are, I think, very illuminative for all of us. So I'm looking forward to going into that when we go into that together. Yeah. And I think maybe just to, introduce myself again, when you sent your photo, I said this to you as well. I thought, oh my goodness, I can't use the standard kind of
Look at all the
Chris.
colors.
Exactly, all the colors.
Love those colors.
So anyways, this is me outside, wandering in the mountains. But I think just, as a background, I grew up in Asia, so I do have some sense about, a small picture of your experience. And, I'm now the director of Awaris. We have 25 staff and 70 trainers working for us. We do about 450, 500 projects a year in these fields, working with, just I think all of what makes us as humans in the organizational work. And as was said in the introduction, we also work in the UK Parliament, German Parliament, European Parliament. And I think overall, I find that the topic of stress and managing stress is actually really underrepresented or kind of just brushed off. Actually, I think it's a big issue for our societies. I think that we are facing societies that are highly stressed, and actually that affects many, many things. So it's good to talk about this and good to get a deeper sense of it. Okay. And maybe, do you want to just say a little bit, Amari, about what happened to you the last time we spoke in terms of stress?
Stress, yeah. I've just transitioned, visiting some family in the U.S. and there's this thing where right before you leave, leave home, you always Murphy's Law is in effect, and everything that goes wrong will. So that week, my partner got malaria, a pretty serious case of malaria. So I was caretaking for him and managing that. And then in the midst of that, I did have a break-in in my home, and we had a laptop get stolen, a very important work laptop get stolen. And of course, these are things that, as you said, Chris, that are just part of life. They happen, and we don't really talk a lot about them, and we want to pretend like everything is great and perfect, and we're all handling it really well, which sometimes it's true, but most of the time, we're all dealing with, some level of suffering, some level of crisis, some level of pain. And I really do believe that it's spaces like this that just allow us to acknowledge that these things are a part of living our life.
Yeah. So, and this kind of leads us into the conversation. There's about 5 things we want to talk about together. How do you manage stress on a personal level as a human? Well, and I'll ask you that in just a moment. And connected to that, I think it's very important to reflect upon what skills. And this is a very important thing that we find working with companies. We do a lot of projects, large scale with companies, thousands of people at a time, and really looking at what skills people have to manage stress. And we'll show some data from that. Okay. And then I think it's really good to talk, especially again in your situation, you are both have responsibility for well-being and for some of the diversity inclusion topics in a very diverse organization. So I think it's good to actually look at that a little bit more specific, like what specific stressors do the people that you represent face. And then I think it's very important for us to take a step back, because we're going to be talking at some level on the individual level and then take a step back at the organizational level. And this is, again, very important. What can organizations actually do? And this is crucial, because I experience organizations are very helpless. They don't feel that they can do much. And there is a lot that can be done. We'll talk about that. Okay. So this is really the goal for today. And I think, maybe just before we start, and then I'll turn it over to you again. I mean, and this is data from the, global survey, which is done by Gallup. And, again, you see that basically stress has just been going on. So the blue line marks the percentage of people who say that yesterday, did you experience, a lot of stress during a lot of the day yesterday, okay? And that's grown in the last, 12, 13 years from 30% of the people to 45%, okay? And that is, that's a real growth. And so I guess it suggests that perhaps we all aren't so good at managing stress. And I guess at this point, I want to just turn to you, Amari. How do you manage your stress? What are some of the things that you do to work with it?
Well, seeing this graph, to me, I see this as, well, this is not a luxury. Managing stress is not something that we get to do when we have time. It's something that really should underpin a lot of how we structure our lives, because it's clear that we're facing increased levels of stress, and I think an increasingly stressful world. And so for me, I treat it as something that is a part of my daily practice, something that I do every single day. And so building out a rest practice for me has been really important. And that looks like just having 20 minutes of a day where I do some kind of mindfulness activity. Mostly that's to rest my body. It's laying down, it's doing like non-sleep deep rest or yoga nidra, 20 minutes a day. And if I can't do that, then it's journaling for 10 minutes, or it's getting on my yoga mat for 10 minutes, but just carving out a little bit of time so that I can on a daily basis address the stress I'm feeling is super, super important. And then I do also want to make the plug to just committing to less. I know that feels so hard in a world where we are given increasingly more options, more choices, more things to do with our time. And oftentimes efficiencies are pushed down at us as you know, we're not seeing necessarily the result of those efficiencies that are being gained. You know, we're just expected to do more. And I think recognizing that I'm a human being and I'm not a machine, and therefore that I can't just continue to add more, find more balance. Instead, I think it's really about recognizing some of the limits that we do have, and saying, yes, I can commit to less. I need to do less. It's not a luxury for me.
Super. And there's a lot of themes I'll pick upon in just a second that you just mentioned both, because I think, you mentioned, first of all, a number of things that you do. You mentioned the importance of doing them regularly, and you also mentioned the importance of letting go. And so we'll go back to these in just a moment. Okay. So, but I think a starting point, and this is where you started, which is very important, that's, managing stress is not about enduring stress. Right.
Yeah.
This is, I think, what a lot of people think, kind of, I just have to kind of be strong and I have to endure it and I have to survive it. And so this is really, really something I feel very strongly about that is just inaccurate. We are not rocks. These images are used often, like, you have to be like a lighthouse, as a leader, Amari, be a lighthouse to your team and this kind of stuff, And, it's just not true. It's just not true. And I think it's very important to acknowledge that we are human beings. And actually, we have to have variance in our states. That's very important for us humans, okay? And so one of the ways of talking about this, and just maybe as a bit of background, I studied physics, so I tend to get a bit nerdy about these things in terms of what exactly are we talking about here when we talk about stress, okay? It's important to understand that. And I think one way of talking about it, there's a number of ways of talking about it, is the activation of our inner states, okay? So this is a chart which kind of maps on the vertical axis the degree of nervous system arousal. Okay, so for example, if I begin to talk like this, and and I'm kind of very speedy and so on, then that okay, my nervous system, it's kind of active. I'm stressed, or what's called sympathetic activation. And the other is the valence of that activation. Okay, so I'm sure when you're packing, apart from the fact that you were burgled, but when you're packing to go home to visit your family, you're activated, but of course you're looking forward to it. Okay.
Excited. So, I'm positive. Yeah.
Exactly. Excited, So, valence, activation can be high, but the valence can be either positive or negative. And this, by the way, it's very important to say this two axis is not vague. So this is really measurable in people. Okay. And this, you could say, corresponds quite clearly to the activation, the degree of activation of the nervous system, as well as to the activation of what's called the dopa mesolimbic system, kind of you could say our hormone system, okay? So this is a kind of a landscape. And interestingly enough, there has been a lot of research to map emotions to this landscape, okay? So if you look at the point of view of neuroscience, emotions are actually manifestations, expressions of our energetic state. Okay, so if I'm feeling, tired and low, and I experience a challenge coming towards me, then my reaction might well be either miserable or distressed. Whereas if I'm, it's what that's like when you're full of energy, then your reaction might well be okay. Let's get focused, perhaps, or whatever else. Okay, so the emotions we face are actually dependent. The emotions we experience are dependent upon the landscape of our experience, defined by the degree of arousal and valence of our experience. Okay, so this is, I think, something that's very important for all of us to understand, is that we are not monolithic, but we have a whole range of internal states that exist. Okay, and this kind of is a way of mapping now what you were saying before. Okay, so essentially you were saying, and this is what is very important, that there is this zone of of stress or of activation, okay, which is natural. You know, it happens. You know, you get on an airplane, you have an important presentation to make, or so on. Okay. So the point is, the first thing is to understand that, you know, there is a zone of getting stressed, and many of us spend a lot of time. That's what the data from Gallup suggested, that we're spending more and more time in the stress. Okay. Yeah. So, and I'll get to this, there's a first question in there, but I'll get to this in a second. So this is where we often think we have to endure, but actually the reality is we have to be able to navigate around these internal states. You know, we have to be able to relax. And if we relax, our nervous system activation will go down. And if it's a positive relaxation, we'll go into regeneration mode, okay? Or we might be in a positive activated mode. That's, you know, where we're growing and learning. And this is actually, you know, there's a lot of correspondence to our internal states here. Or, and this is something that's very important that you said too, we understand that we have to let go, okay? That there are states which are, you know, maybe a little bit slightly negative, you know, a little bit melancholy, a little bit kind of like to withdraw, but this is actually very, very healthy. So when we speak about the ability to manage stress, it's actually this ability to not get stuck in the stress state and fend it off, but the simple acknowledgement that we as humans have to be able to rotate through these different states.
Yeah, and I love what.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, because it's one of the biggest skills that I've seen both serve staff that I work with as well as myself, is just developing an awareness of where they are on this map, right? Are they stressed? Are they letting go? Are they regenerating? And so building more and more capacity within ourselves to identify, even to be able to say, you know, going back to that great slide with your emotions on it, right? Being able to name what's happening is one of the very first steps to being able to then respond in a way that's positive and supportive for yourself, which I think is, you know, a way as we kind of navigate and get out of this stress. That's, you know, it's so incredibly important that we start with just knowing where we are.
Exactly. And I think going to this, there's a question in the questions first about, well, how do you support someone? You know, I think, as you say, I mean, even just listening to you as a leader, you know, it really sounds like you understand this. You know what I mean? That you're able to recognize where are people. And once you as a human being realize you cannot always be in the stress state, then you just have to acknowledge that certain deadlines cannot be reached. It's just not possible. You have to be able to let go. And this is not an unrealistic thing. And this is what I do. And I work a lot in high performance organizations, you know. It's sorry, that's the reality. You cannot maintain high performance. Any sports person knows that. You cannot maintain high performance if you do not have recovery, if you do not have regeneration, growth, and letting go. Okay, it's just not realistic. And so, you know, I think that's the first point is, as a leader, is this deep understanding that we are human beings, we are not machines, and there has to be a balance.
I heard this great phrase called the simmering six. You know, don't get stuck in the simmering six. Okay. You know, you can be, when you're at 10, you're on and you're performing and you're at, you know, you're at your capacity, you're being challenged. It's great. But, and then when we're off, you know, we're at a 0, we're resting, we're recovering, we're regenerating. But when we get stuck in that middle where we think we can never rest and we always have to be somewhat on, that's where that's when we get stuck in stress, and we'll never be able to really move past it. And especially if our leaders are not recognizing that this is where we actually are, and that we need to move out of that first.
Yeah. So this may be a good question to everyone. You know, just type in the chat, just what percentage of time do you think you spend in the stress state during your working hours? Okay. So just type, you know, stressed, double dots, 40%, 70%, 80%, okay? And then also think about what percentage of your evening time or your weekend time do you spend in regeneration or growing? I'd be just curious to just hear some numbers, just to see how do people judge themselves, okay? Because the key thing is not, you know, like you're saying, is don't get stuck in the border to that stress state and always kind of never quite get out of it, you know, but then never be able to get into that, you know, whatever, really active state, okay? Yeah, stress 60%, okay? So that is, you know, one percentage, and that's quite a common. And we've done measurements, we do a lot of measurements with people, and you really see there's people spend often 70, 80% of their working time in significant sympathetic arousal. Okay, weekend regeneration 20%. Exactly, yeah. I'm curious what some of the others are saying here. So, this ability to move is really what we talk about stress management skills. So stress management skills is not about enduring, toughing it out, but it's actually about this ability to move around this landscape, okay? And there again, it's a skill, it's a set of skills. And this is very important to understand that all of us have skills that can do this, okay? So, and unfortunately, and this is a thing I'm sure you know a lot about, Amari, too, there is something called a window of tolerance. The window of tolerance is basically the field, the area in which we're able to self-regulate, where we do not kind of lose control of ourselves, but we're able to actually, affect things. And what I see a lot is that actually a lot of people are stuck outside of this window of tolerance. And I find this in companies. Like when I say to people, I think we all need to kind of slow down and not be so speedy. And people say, oh, Chris, you have no idea. This is not possible. We have so many goals. There's just no chance. That's typically a sign that people are outside of their window of tolerance. They're not able to regulate themselves anymore. Okay? And that is, and Amara, you know a lot about this. That happens, of course, when people have traumas, capital T traumas. And it also happens increasingly, I find, that many people in the workplace have an accumulation of small t traumas. They've been in a highly aroused state for so long that they're no longer able to regulate themselves. And I don't know if you want to kind of add to that. I mean, you see this a lot in your work, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, both personally and professionally. I also am healing from PTSD and have had to spend a lot of time learning what my window of tolerance actually is, as opposed to what I thought it was, right? Which is often we think of it as this big space that we get to walk around in, and we don't have to necessarily face the stress that we're dealing with. We can just kind of, keep moving, keep it moving. We don't, keep moving forward. But in reality, it's oftentimes much smaller and much more, it has much wider impacts on our physical health, on our mental health, on our emotional health. And so then when you look inside organizations, you see this replicated all over, where we're all kind of, again, stuck in a stress state and not necessarily aware of how we can get beyond that. And I love what you said about, that this is a practice, because if we do this once when we're having a hard time, we're not really building the skills, the neuroplasticity in our minds to be able to get back to a letting go state or a regenerating state. This takes, time. It takes us showing up in that space every day so that we can, when we're realizing that we're outside of that window of tolerance, we can, do supportive practices to bring ourselves back within, a letting go place or a regenerating place.
Yeah, so this is important. And I think a lot of people, and it's interesting to see in the chat that people have a good sense of that, actually. They're able to answer where are they a lot of the time. And I think this is a very important step, that we're able to actually understand where we are and are we able to regulate or not. Okay. And, essentially what we see is that we do, like I said, we do a lot of these surveys with large populations of people, thousands at the time. And for example, we see that the more stressed people get, the less they have an ability to self-regulate. Okay, so this goes back to this window of tolerance, is that the more time you spend in the high stress state, the less you're able to consciously regulate both your internal states or to balance, tension versus relaxation. And this is something that I experience a lot. I often tell people, I think we need to relax here. And everyone looks at me like I'm a complete idiot, You say relaxed, But it's an important skill.
There's no time.
Yeah,
no
there's
time.
no time. Don't tell me to relax. But actually, it's a very important skill. And again, this is something that's, again, for anybody who needs to have a high performance, they need to be able to relax. So you need to be able to actually vary your state. And so typically when people are very stressed, they don't feel that they can vary their state. Okay. So this is one of the dangers about, what happens to us when we get stressed at all. Okay. So, what's very important that is for all of us to understand that there is a lot we can do about this. It's not about enduring in the stress state, but it's about being able to shift our state through various things, okay? And there's a number of them, and I'm going to get you to talk about some of the ones that you're good at, Amari. But essentially, we've done a lot of work on this, and we're actually publishing a book on this. It's the different skills that exist in order to regulate your state. And there's 12 of them. Some of them are in the physical more, some of them in the mental, emotional, some are in the social areas. Okay, so for example, having good sleep, being able to sleep well, having good rest and recovery is very, very important. You move essentially when you sleep. You move around this landscape. Okay, interesting enough, same like the basic skill of relaxing the nervous system. Okay, or maintaining focus. These are all different types of skills which help you basically navigate through the landscape. Okay, so I'm curious, Mari, we've done this before a little bit, but when you look at this, what are the ones that you're actually good at, or that you actually practice or engage in
Yeah.
regularly?
Well, I'm a big fan of non-sleep deep rest, yoga nidra. It's one of my go-to tools, and for a variety of reasons, because
Yes.
it is intentional relaxation. It
Yeah.
is sitting with your nervous system and watching it shift from
Yes.
a sympathetic nervous system response to a parasympathetic nervous system response. And
Yeah.
it's really bringing awareness to the internal and external landscape of my body and mind. And so for me, using that as a daily rest practice, just 20 minutes has been revolutionary. And one, knowing where I am, but then
Yeah.
being able to take the steps, the next right thing I need to do for myself, really unfolds from that awareness in such a easy way. It feels like a superpower at times when you can enter into you start in a place where you're feeling that, you're feeling at, that high
Edgy,
energy.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah,
tense.
you're
Yeah.
just like
Yeah.
intense. And then to be
Yeah.
able to watch and intentionally move yourself down into a place of relaxation, self-awareness, positive
Yeah.
outlook is incredible. And I really believe it can be something that helps a lot of people if we all practice it a little bit more.
Yeah. So this is, and again, I said this to you before. I rarely hear people to use such language like yourself, but it's very important to understand that because of this practice, which includes some conscious breathing and works on the nervous system, that ends up being a relaxation practice. Plus, you build self-awareness. You have the ability to regulate your nervous system, and this is really, I recommend to everyone here, please. It is possible to learn to regulate your nervous system. It is one of the most important skills. And many people struggle in life because they don't even know that that's possible. Okay? So this is something that, one can really learn, and the better one gets, and this is again what you're describing, is that you're basically, it's a neuroplastic pathway now. You just do it and it works for you. You can rely upon that. Okay.
And I find that I use it not only when I'm stressed, but as somebody who suffers with chronic pain, this is one of the most reliable ways that I found that I can treat my pain, and that I can bring myself out of from a place of overwhelm and overstimulation and pain to a place where I can start to address, okay, what is it that I need, which is oftentimes a glass of water, a snack, maybe a nap, and those things can be obscured by just that high emotional state that we're in. And so we're looking for problems, and we're looking for solutions, and we're probably hurting ourselves and our relationships in the process, when all we really need is something a little bit more, some movement, some healthy eating.
Exactly. So this is a very good example. For example, movement as well changes your energy state, gets you out of a stuck place, and it really helps. Just getting up from your desk, getting up from the room you're in. Okay. So this is interesting, and this is what I think is important for everyone here again, is nobody has to be perfect at these things. There's just a variety of things. Each of us is different. I have a different set of skills than you do. There's no doubt about that. I have a different set of skills from my colleagues here at work, but it's important that I understand my skills. So just so you can, top of your head, you can go straight away. And you said this to me before, I move, I eat healthy, I know how to kind of have conscious breathing, relax my nervous system. I'm self-aware, I have a positive outlook, and I connect well to people. Zack, 7 of these 12, tick, 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 tick. They're present. And therefore, of course, because of that, you can trust them. You can call upon them, despite the fact that you face probably a lot more stress than most of us ever do in terms of the conditions, environments you face.
Well, the variety you mentioned is incredibly important, because I remember times in my life where I only had, say, movement to deal with my stress, or I only was using sleep. And I found that, my window of tolerance was much smaller because I only had my skills were much less varied. And so if we can find, you know, a wide breadth of skills to support us, we can just do a little bit more to support ourselves then.
So it might again be something good question for the chat or for the Q&A, please. I'd be very curious. Just type in the chat, which of the skills do you think are your strengths? And which of those skills are your, you know, that are not so much your strengths? Okay. So for example, for me, connection to others, I think people who know me, I'm a sociable person, you know, I get along well with people. But when I get quite stressed, I tend to withdraw more into solitariness. That's, for example, a weakness of mine or a whatever, not a strength of mine. And I think it's very important for each of us to understand that. So I'd be curious if you write in the chat, please, you know, what are your strong skills and what are the ones that perhaps you just kind of need some work on? Okay. Super Belinda, strength, sleep. Yeah, I'm one of those too.
Yeah. Great. Good for you.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Good for you. Okay. Yeah, exactly. And physical movement coming through too. Okay. And, you know, if you look at physical movement, for example, Beth put it in the chat, physical movement moves us through the landscape. So we could be stressed, we could be kind of depressed, we could be tired. If we then get up and do jogging, then essentially we activate our nervous system, we stress ourselves, and then afterwards we recover and we relax. Okay. So, you know, this is kind of each of these skills moves us through the landscape. Okay. So sleep as well, you know, sleep has been mentioned. Sleep basically moves us to the bottom right of this landscape or middle bottom of this landscape. Okay. You know, and this is kind of very important to understand. Eating moves us, you could say, depending on how we eat, when we overeat, it moves us a little bit into kind of sleeping and kind of a little bit irritable. When we eat in a mindful, present way, then it moves us to kind of a stable, satisfied zone. So it's very interesting to think about it this way, that each of these skills moves us through this landscape. Okay. So for example, also you mentioned you have positive outlook, Amari. Positive outlook just moves us to the right. You know, we see things, we take things as learning opportunities. Okay. So, you know, again, these bubbles are not accidental. Okay. The reason we write the word growth in there is actually that those states underneath those, the emotions underneath those, the energetic states behind those, have much higher neuroplasticity associated with them. Okay. So essentially growth, having this positive outlook moves you into growth mindset where you're more able to learn and actually adapt. So, you know, each of us has a different profile of these different skills, okay? And what we see again in our data here is that essentially that the actually engaging in these skills is highly, highly predictive of reducing perceived stress levels. So we've done a lot of assessments of stress factors, and we really see that the engagement in the skills, the resilience skills balance score, what we call, which is a kind of a measure of people's strengths, you know, minus people's weaknesses, has a very strong correlation with stress reduction, perceived stress. Okay, so the more we apply our stress management skills, the lower the perceived stress score. Okay, and high stress management skills explain about 40% of the variance in perceived stress. Okay, so many people think I'm stressed because of my work or because of my situations and so on, and we see that actually no. If you look at populations of people, the actual stress factors explain a very low percentage of the variance in perceived stress. That actually the engagement in these skills explains much more of the variance in perceived stress. Okay. And I think that's what you're also showing. And interesting enough, we also can identify what skills have the highest correlation with resilience, okay, with resilience or reducing stress. And interesting enough, I've seen this varies by population. Okay, so for example, when I've worked a lot in the nonprofit sector, you really see that connection to purpose is a very big driver of people's resilience. Whereas, for example, when you work with, sometimes I've worked in very engineering-oriented firms with management teams, there, interesting enough, attentional control was one of the highest predictors of resilience, people's ability to stay focused, okay? In other environments, you know, I worked with HR populations there, the connection to others was the highest predictor of resilience. And this is very interesting to understand. We are not all the same. Depending on what type of work we do, depending on what kind of industry we're in, there are different predictors of resilience. And this is very interesting to see in populations, to see which ones predict. So for example, for you, Amar, if we looked at you, what do you think would be your strongest ones that are most predictive of your resilience?
Well, you know, I do work in a nonprofit environment, so I do think connection to purpose really motivates me and
Exactly.
often insulates me from stress. I'd say the thing I'm working on the most currently is self-compassion and care. I think that's the more that I invest in self-compassion, in accepting the emotional states that I'm in, whether that's, one of the positive ones or one of the negative, valence ones, then I'm able to kind of find a bit more, homeostasis. I can regulate and come back to a sense of myself. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm happy or that I'm, that everything's fixed, but it does mean that I feel I can tap into a sense of peace that isn't necessarily there if I'm, caught up in the stories of my pain or my suffering.
And self-criticism and perfectionism. So it's very interesting to see that as well.
Exactly.
You see it in some, I've seen it in legal populations, that legal populations tend to have a high perfectionism, and that self-compassion is a strong predictor, actually, interesting enough, in legal populations, people working in the legal field. So I think it's just important to understand that it's not all the same. We aren't all the same, and whatever groups we're in are not all the same. And what we also see is that different groupings of skills, so we call them competencies. The self-regulation competencies is one group, the healthy behaviors is another group, and the social and emotional integration skills, the social emotional skills, they regulate different stressors. So when we look at people's stressors and we see which stressors have the highest correlation with stress outcomes, and then we see what skills people have, we see that the self-regulation skills actually are good at managing things like workload or over demand. But interestingly enough, they aren't so good at managing things like conflict or change. Whereas it's the social emotional skills actually that are better at regulating the stress of change. And this is, I think, again, very important when we begin to expand the picture from the individual to see that the social emotional culture of an organization is actually very predictive of the ability of that organization to manage the stress of change. Okay. And that's why it's very interesting that working with nonprofit organizations, which tend to have on average a better social emotional culture fabric. That's because in many companies you say, well, the culture is bad, but I take the pain money. The money, the pain money. I take a higher salary because of the pain of working there. Whereas that, of course, isn't the case often in nonprofits. Therefore, there usually tends to be a stronger social fabric. You see that they're often also more able to adapt to change. They're more adaptable. So and purpose is one of them, which is in there. So this is interesting to see as well, to understand which skills actually are predictive of handling what kind of stress. And what we do is we measure this with people. So we do this, in large scales, and we help people understand, well, what are the skills that I've mastered? Okay. That I'm, even, and, if I listen to you, Amari, I'd say at least 6 or 7 you've mastered. You say you're working on 1 or 2, but basically there's, at least 6 or 7 that you can rely upon, that that you won't fall. And it's the same for me. There's at least 6 or 7 where I know I won't fall off them anymore. I won't eat poorly. I won't sleep poorly. I won't give up doing my sports. I do a lot of mindfulness practice. I just, won't fall off that horse,
Right.
There's some that are emerging perhaps, and there's some which are actually in need of, they need to be focused on. Okay. And so you can really help people understand, how am I on individual skills? What are the kind of competencies overall that I need to develop? And above all, how do they match with the stressors I'm facing? Okay. So this is, I find this really helps people understand that, it's not all the same. It's really that, skills predict my ability to manage stress, and different stresses need different types of skills. And it begins to, it's like, like a job, different type of job skills, how you deal with different kinds of demands, isn't it?
A good example is, this next couple of weeks, I'm staying with my parents, visiting them in the US, and the skills that I need here to navigate and stay centered in my world are very different than what I use when I'm in my own personal space, right? I'm much more likely to turn inward and do a lot more meditation if I'm alone. But here with my family, I'm looking at connection to others as the biggest thing that grounds me in my day-to-day life. And I think feeling that this is an opportunity to deepen, that particular skill practice is important as a part of that positive outlook. But it also means that I am holding them loosely, when these skills, when we're like, oh, I didn't get to do my X, whatever's going to regulate me today, when we hold that so tightly, oftentimes it can then become the source of more stress, right? Where we're not able to hit the thing that we think it's going to bring us peace. And knowing that actually many of these things can bring us peace if learned to be applied in the right scenario, given where we are in our lives at that moment.
Yeah, so this is really, I think a lot of people have a very undifferentiated, image of stress. And companies do too. I think companies tend to not really understand how to deal with it, or just to not look at it, or to just kind of hope it'll go away or whatever else. But you have to have a really good understanding, differentiated understanding of what are the stressors, what are the skills the population has. So we do large, assessment of populations. What are the skills? What are the ones that are missing? What are the ones that are most predictive? And what are the ones that need to be developed? And this is very important, I think, that we need to kind of have a smartness around our inner landscape. And this is what I hear from you. You just have a smartness when you talk about the challenges you faced in your life. And the challenges you face, I mean, I know you're also dealing with the fallout of the war in Eritrea, how it's affecting your team. There's trauma going on. People have experienced, really shocking things, and you're exposed to them,
Yeah.
But you have a lot of smarts. You're able to deal with that.
Yeah, and then go on to, and that's sort of my role, is then to go on and share them as staff need them. Yeah, our team right now in Ethiopia has been facing a pretty serious security crisis, including evacuations and relocations and real living in active conflict. And one of the things that we did early on was making sure that we put information like this in their hands, so that they understood that, one, they're not crazy because they can't sleep, or because they're having trouble eating, or because they're feeling stressed to the nth degree, but that there are things that they can do just personally to help cope. And the goal isn't to heal them, the goal isn't to move them out of where they are or to change the environment, but just to give them a few skills that they can use to help bring them a little bit closer to that window of tolerance during a period of time that's honestly just completely unpredictable and very tough. So these can be used to help bring us back to center after a rough day, and these are also the skills that we use when we're helping people recover from war.
And I think, again, and this is kind of getting on to our next topic, which is kind of, there are challenges different populations face, which are just different, And again, it's very interesting to see that. So, for example, this is from one company, including people in China, India. So I'm seeing that the females, the women, face a higher stress load. And we see this often in the data, that sometimes minorities, sometimes women, sometimes people in certain age groups just face higher stress loads, okay? And this is, significantly, here 61% of the women are facing 3 stressors or more. And that's really 3 stressors, 3 things in my life that are kind of seriously, whether it's high workload or taking care of somebody in the family, or whether it's conflicts at work, whatever they are. These typically push people over the edge. So you really see that statistically, and I'll show you this data in just a moment. So again, and I think, I guess I'm too much of a person who tries to understand causality. It's really important when you have different groups is to really take that seriously. Okay. So for example, your group, and I mentioned Eritrea, but you said it's Ethiopia, they're facing higher stressors. Okay. So therefore I need to support them more. Okay. So that they can still exercise their skills, and this is really important to understand, and to also see, if you look at the different stressors people are facing, well, look at the difference in the skills that they're exhibiting. And here, this is the balance of skills exhibited in this population between the males and the females. And you see, interesting, there's a different set of skills that they're exhibiting. And therefore, given the stressors they're facing, some of them are struggling more than others, okay? And this is just, I think, so illuminating to, it's not a mystery anymore. It's not like a black box, but to go, okay, there's different situations people are facing. There's different skills, which are the most predictive of getting them out of those situations. And some people have these skills and other people don't. And so let's work on now helping these people understand that, have these skills.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so this is, I think, kind of really interesting to kind of really help. And at the same time, to acknowledge, this is what I mentioned, we see this as well for large populations, that essentially when you look at how many stressors they're facing, that up to about 4 or 3 stressors, that basically the individual skill exercise is more important than the number of stressors. Okay, so if you look at, for example, on this chart on the left, there's a certain percentage, the blue line says, well, how many people have low resilience? Okay. And so from 1 to 4, which is a quadrupling of the number of stressors, you see kind of increases from 40 to about 55%. Okay. But then you see from 4 to 6, it kind of goes up it's just going up by 50%. It goes up to, almost 90%. Okay. And so what this says is that in the Goldilocks zone of life, you could say hopefully the normal working zone of life, people's individual engagement in skill building, well-being skill building, resilience skill building, stress management skill building, whatever we call it, has a bigger impact than any outside intervention. Okay, that's very important to understand. But once you have people, like in your case, in a zone where they're beyond 4 stressors, okay, so in Ethiopia, facing trauma, facing, having to rebuild, having to help people, having to move, then you need to actually help. And this is very important also for people who looking at populations in their organizations to understand that you cannot expect people that are in the toxic working zone, whatever that is, and it varies by the population, by the stressors. Okay, and it's very interesting to see that different stressors are more likely to push people into a toxic zone, but you cannot expect people to manage it themselves, because you see from the data that basically less than 10% are able to actually still be resilient in that environment. Okay, and that's where it's very important for then the organization to intervene. Okay, so this is the limit. So I think it's very important to, yes, we all need to cultivate our stress management skills, but it's not a way of pushing the blame on the individuals that you guys need to sort it out and become more stress resilient. Yeah. And so I think that this is something, it's very nice to hear you, because instinctively you do this. You see, you understand this, you know what you can manage, but you also know, given that you've dealt with chronic stress, you've dealt with trauma in your life, you've dealt with PTSD, there are times when you need help. That is not possible to do this yourself. Okay. And this goes back to some of the questions we've seen. Okay? So I'm just kind of curious, you want to kind of comment on that and your experience about reaching, how you help people?
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it really well, where there are real personal limits. And I think when we hit those limits, usually the thing that we want to do is just reach for the skill, the thing that we think, oh, is just going to bring us back down. But honestly, what I'm seeing when I'm working with people who are kind of at, 4, 5, 6, and they're in that big T trauma zone, is that we're talking about sleep. We're talking about healthy eating and good eating food and just getting enough, nutrition. And we're talking about drinking water. We're bringing it back down to a level of care that's that's simple and basic, but can't be overlooked, or, you can't build on that unless you have those basic needs are being met. And that's when, when people are in that toxic zone, they're going to start to lose the ability to regulate those basic things, because they're pushed so far into stress. And so that's why, yeah, when organizations are layering on the stress on these stressors, on the stressors that already exist, that's when we start to see real burnout, begin to take hold. And that is not something that you heal from alone. Healing anyway is done in community, but
yeah,
when we're talking about burnout at an organizational level, that is the same thing. You don't do it alone. You need leaders who are going to recognize really where we are and give people the space to feed themselves, to sleep,
Yeah. And just simply extend a hand. And this is very crucial that, sometimes I experience a lot of leaders, they kind of feel helpless because they feel they have to fix things. No, you don't have to fix everything, but you just have to express care, and actually demonstrate care, invite people to conversations. So I've worked a lot in very high pressure environments where just the simple expression of care on a regular basis already actually helps people to move. Okay?
Yeah.
So this is, essentially what you see also with things like companies that are anchoring habits. So for example, not sending emails outside of work hours, okay? Or reducing the number of meetings. So we work a lot of the European institutions, all 51 European institutions, and we're doing projects there to reduce meeting load, okay? How can we reduce meeting load? And there's a lot you can do. It's very interesting. It's like budget management. Meeting load management is almost like budget management. You just have to look at the data and say, okay, how can we reduce meeting load so people can actually work and not have to work late all the time, okay? Or for example, when people anchor things like focus times in their calendars and it's supported by the company, there's a lot of data where that really helps. So one of the things that I'm not a fan of is like saying, yeah, we're going to magically make stress go away. No, look at the causes. So for example, we see that workload and work-life balance are two of the highest predictors of excess stress, of the stress factors that push you over. And you can do a lot to reduce, even without taking away the goals, you can do a lot to reduce workload by talking about how you respond to emails, looking at the meeting load, looking at certain goals, giving people focus time, meeting free time, and so on. So there is a lot that can be done. And what's interesting to see is that when you take groups of people on journeys, so we do this, we take hundreds of people on a journey, then we say, okay, look, we're going to work on attention regulation, we're going to work on positive outlook together. When the organization does things in parallel, so we then get the organization to do things in parallel, which resonates. And so then you can really shift a large population of people at the same time. And I think that this is what's important, that it becomes a shared journey. Okay? That is not the individual has a problem. Yeah. No, look, this is the landscape. This is the landscape of stressors we're facing. That's life. This is the landscape of skills we have. We have some skill development needs, and we have some organizational shift needs. It's not so hard. No, it's really not so complicated. Absolutely. So this is, I think, kind of where we are in the journey, is to say, look, let's not talk about well-being as a state, okay? It is useful, but actually it's more important to talk about skills, to help people with skills and to help people with skill development, okay? Because then they have something which they can rely upon. And once you have that, you also understand it's not individual single responsibility, it's a shared responsibility. And actually, I find organizations are quite good at skill development, actually. Absolutely. Once they understand this, you know how to do this. You have, I'm sure you have your whole skill profile mapping that you do for your populations and so on, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we're wanting to bring forward even more is bringing these skills during onboarding. Resilience as a skill that is discussed as soon as people start working with us, is that, just as you learn, your company, you begin to know your tools that you're going to be using. We want our resilience skills to be one of those tools that people kind of get given with them on the very first days, to say, this is what we do as an organization. These are the practices that we use to manage stress, because of all the reasons you just said, Chris, of we're not running away from it. They're here to stay, but we do want you to be prepared. And then, of course, actually creating space to step back and build those skills in intentional ways. So with One Acre Fund, we did our people leadership did a training with Awareness. I think we've done 2 now, and really just creating like a whole day where we just focus on, the identifying the skills that are needed and then practicing them in conversation with our colleagues. It's hugely beneficial. And then, of course, there's the organizational responsibility of actually embedding these in our performance management evaluations, of actually embedding the cultural contributions that people who show up with resilience make, having that be a recognized part of performance evaluation, right? Because we know that culture eats strategy for breakfast. We all know how important it is. But if as organizations, we're not recognizing the individuals that are doing that work and rewarding it, then it's gonna fall to the wayside, just like, a lot of other emotional labor gets overlooked. And so these are ways that like organizations can embed it right in without having to reinvent any new thing or solve any nuclear problem. This is just kind of a part of recognizing that we're working with humans.
Yeah, exactly. We're working with humans. We always work with humans. There's many things we do to cultivate skills of humans, and as you say, in onboarding, in recruiting, in training, And once you understand that, I think it becomes less of a mystery, while at the same time recognizing that for some things it isn't possible. And I think it's also important. Divya wrote, "Oh my goodness, scoring, measuring, predicting. This is mastering. This feels stressful." Yeah, and I apologize, of course. We are talking at the organizational level here. Okay, so as an individual, forget all that. As an individual, it's important to just be kind to yourself, to know when it's time to just have a rest, look out the window, maybe read some poetry, listen to some music. So I think as a person, we have to have these habits that we know, that we can trust, that we can call upon, and that are available to us. Okay, so apologies, Divya. I hope we didn't get you stressed in this language. At the same time,
what Belinda in the chat just said, that saying no is the skill, and I think that might just be one of those takeaways here of, you're right. You can't just layer on skill and not recognize that at first we're saying no to things. We're taking things off of our plate because we can't do it all.
Exactly, yeah. And that's, I think that the more, and it's again listening to you introduced yourself and said, hey, I also have some chronic issues which I attend to. once you begin to attend to these things, you actually become aware of your boundaries and you know how to say no, which I'm sure doesn't make you less of a performer. You wouldn't be where you are running operations and, people operations in East Africa, Malawi, and so on, if you didn't have a high degree of, functioning. But because you know how to take care of yourself and do that,
Yeah,
it's kind of.
I find that my focus follows what I give attention to. And that's one of the beautiful things about saying no to something, is that then you get to really say yes to something important. We say yes to a lot of unimportant things every day, and not many of them move us in the direction we want to be going in.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, Meta, you said something fantastic. Meta in the chat wrote, boundaries first, balance second. Absolutely. Okay. So this is very, very crucial, especially in today's age, which is boundary-less, that you really have to learn to be good at your boundaries, whatever those boundaries are, whether it's saying no to a task. For me, I think I'm fair to say I'm very good to my work-life boundaries. Okay. So, kind of I do my morning rituals and practice and so on. I don't look at my computer. I don't even look at my phone much in the evening at all. I just don't do that. I read, I recover. So that's my form of boundaries. Others have other form of boundaries, but that is very important, because if you go back to the window of tolerance, not respecting your boundaries pushes you out of that window of tolerance. Okay. So this is very important, Meta. Thanks for that.
Yeah. I do think phone boundaries are going to be a hotter and hotter topic, and I'm happy to hear that you two are trying to find distance in your distance from your phone, because I think it's one of the best things that we can do to have a little bit more peace.
Yeah, exactly. So I must say, recently, I haven't done this all the time yet, but recently I just dropped my phone when I take off my shoes. I just dropped my phone in the kind of area where my coat is, and I just leave it there. And it's very liberating to not even have your phone near you in the evening. I find it very liberating. It's like
like that,
6,
like
7
a phone
hours.
basket.
Yeah,
Exactly. I know there's teachers use it in schools now, right, to pull focus, and I think we should be doing the same to ourselves, given creating some of those physical things of like, okay, putting this away for now.
Yeah. And Belinda, you say that too in your chat, with the new work from home working environment, I find it important to keep life home balance separate. So as well, when I was working from home, I used to have a moment where I closed my laptop and I went for a 10-minute walk before I went into my, evening recovery routine, because it had, a real boundary. Okay. Yeah, it's nice to see, Harriet, as well. You also say you don't look at your work phone, laptop once I've started working. Okay. But my brain still chews over the mental load. Yeah, it's true. Okay. Chopping the chatter is hard. And I find that too. So recently I walked home and I noticed that even at home, I was still pacing, I was mentally pacing and I was physically pacing too. And so, recognizing that and knowing how to shift. And you've said that, I find journaling. So Harriet, if you find that you're often mentally pacing, then journaling is very, very helpful. Learning the skill of just naming it and writing down, chewing over it and getting it out of your head. It's very important.
Yeah. I also have found recently that sometimes when I spend a lot of time trying to avoid thinking about the thing, that I create a lot more energy around that avoidance. And so journaling is one way to really bring that to the focus and say, okay, what am I really concerned about? And then I love also thinking, well, what if everything does go well? And that's pulling on that positive outlook piece again is, okay, I've got this worry. I'm very willing to go down the path of what if everything goes wrong? Because that's just, how our brains work. But can I engage in the other side and say, what if everything goes well? And I often find some optimism brought there.
Yeah. So, just as an invitation to everyone, especially if you're working with teams, when you're working with small organizations, larger organizations, feel free to reach out to us to have a look at these resilience assessments, how we do that. And I think you see it's very helpful. It just gives everyone language around this sense of what skills they have and looking at how that is for a whole group. So that's certainly one thing to really just, encourage everyone. Cultivate your resilience skills, get a sense of your own profile of what skills you're strong at. So you can rely upon them. And you might identify ones that you might want to work on. We had some people as well mention ones that they want to work on. And I think from the organizational point of view, I think it's very, very helpful to get this sense of actually what do we need to engage in to move our groups of people? What do they need? What challenges are they facing? Because I think the biggest problem is when it's unclear and it's just like, okay, people are stressed, but we don't know what to do about it, you know. Okay. So I think we're at the end of our time, Amari. You know, like I said to you at the beginning, I was very moved when I met you and we just spoke, and I thought, wow, you know, put my problems in perspective. And I think you've just showed us again and again that you just have a lot of heart and a lot of knowledge about your own internal state and regulating these aspects. So thank you very much for sharing all that and bringing that. Thanks for doing that also for the 1 Acre Fund.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for giving me space to share a little bit about my journey. It really, that this opportunity for reflection is incredibly important to me as well. So thank you very much. And thank you for everyone for joining in and listening.
Sure, thank you. And we hand back to Katie with that, I think.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you both so much for sharing with us today, and to everyone who attended. As I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, a short survey will pop up when this has finished. Please do leave some feedback if you can. We really do appreciate it. Everything Chris and Amari have shared today has been recorded and it will be sent to you after the webinar, so you'll be able to refer back to everything they have discussed today. So again, thank you everyone for attending, and thank you both for sharing with us.
Thank you very much. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
All the best.
Bye, everybody.